Okay, I want to tell you about our next guest. Ana Paulina Luna is a firebrand. She has been extremely active in the MAGA conservative movement for a while. She's an Air Force veteran. She currently represents Florida's 13th congressional district, and she's got a brand new book out called The Legend of Narnia. You're going to love this. All right, Ana, thanks for joining us. I'm so excited. I mean, what a couple months. You've got a newborn, a new book. I mean, you are... I don't know how you do it all.
I mean, it's definitely been interesting transitioning into those 2 and 3 hour sleep cycles, but we're loving every minute of it.
I've done 4 books. It's a crazy life when that book launches, just doing the interviews and staying on top of it. And I can't imagine throwing in the mix of a newborn in that. I want to talk about the book in just a minute, but I do want to start with both what's going on in Israel and then here in Washington for this speaker's race. Obviously, you've got a background. You served in the military, in the Air Force. I was astonished by a few things, and let's just start with the intelligence failure. I feel like the idea that this wasn't one missile, this wasn't one individual. You had a series of missiles fired in. You had 1,000 terrorists, let's call it what it is, flood in and take people hostage. How did we miss this, and what do we need to be asking right now?
You know, interestingly enough, I just came across an article from the New York Times that was talking about how a lot of the reason why this attack happened was because there were sleeper cells that were already in Israel awaiting activation. And, you know, when you're looking at really the scope of even like, let's take our southern border, for example, you have, you know, over 600,000 people that have come here illegally that have potentially gotten away, and then how the FBI has kind of turned a blind eye to it. You know this, I know this, but there's intelligence sharing operations. And I think, you know, instead of organizations like the FBI going after voters before an election, they need to be focusing on these extremist terror cells that are likely already here in the United States. And in the case of Israel, we're already there. You know, a lot of people, I don't think ever expected it to happen to this magnitude. But what's even crazier to me, Sean, is that you actually have pro-Palestinian movements here in the United States that are using images of those gliders coming in for their promotions for the protests.
It's disgusting. I cannot believe. It was funny. I shared this with the audience before you got on. 49% of Democrats in this country now side with the Palestinians versus 38% for the Israelis. I don't know when this happened. I feel like I went to sleep and woke up and the Democratic Party switched, while I was asleep. I just didn't realize, how do you side with people who do this?
There's a lot of hateful rhetoric, and I think that people here are looking for some form of, whether it's camaraderie or whatever it might be, but they don't realize that, even if they were to do some of these protests in some of these countries overseas in the Middle East, they likely would not be alive. And so it's very interesting to kind of see the rhetoric here that's especially pushed out of a lot of the four-year institutions. You saw Harvard was, doing some gross protesting in defense of Palestine while this is taking place. And, it's just mind-boggling. You see a lot of these feminists saying, end the occupation of Palestine, or of Israel, Palestine. And ultimately, what I'm finding is that these people are just uninformed. They don't know really how good they have it here in the United States and really what they're even protesting for.
So I want to go back to a comment you just made about the southern border. When I was listening to some of the reports, these folks were chanting death to Israel, death to the United States. If our southern border is as porous and open as we all can see through the video reporting down there, are you concerned about what's coming in through our southern border that could potentially harm our citizens?
Most certainly. Just this year alone, over 143 individuals from the FBI's terrorist watch list have been apprehended by Border Patrol. Again, that's in addition to the 600,000 gotaways just last year alone. And that's really the fault of this administration. People say that it shouldn't be partisan and that we're always trying to make it partisan here in Washington. But the fact is that for years, they said that if you wanted, and by they, I mean the establishment Democrat machine in media, said that if you wanted border security, that you were xenophobic and racist. Yeah. And yet just in, I think, the last couple of weeks, the Biden administration has started construction on some portions of the border wall south of us. And the fact is that they're just completely quiet. It's okay now. And so there's a lot of propaganda going around, but there's a very likely threat of these terrorist cells being here in the United States. And again, they want to see the destruction of the West. They do not like us. They do not like our values. And as you saw in those videos, they're very credible threats.
Don't you think, though, that I firmly believe that the rest of the world is watching how we've reacted to Russia's aggressive incursions into Ukraine, and now they're watching how we react to Hamas. But I don't think either of those situations would have happened if Trump was still president. They did not. They were scared of Trump. They thought he was erratic and unpredictable. They look at this feckless foreign policy of this administration and say, what are you going to do about it?
Most certainly. In fact, that's actually the number one reason why I endorsed Trump early on. I was one of the first, I think, one or two members from the Florida delegation to do that. But, foreign policy is incredibly important. And with Trump, they knew that they couldn't mess around. I have a shirt that says FOIA and find out, but it really follows the FAFO term. And I think that that's really what we're seeing in a foreign policy perspective. These countries understand that Joe Biden right now is very much so compromised by places like Russia and China and our adversaries. And, being on House oversight, we're starting to give that information to the American people. But, how could they even remotely be intimidated by the United States when we have someone leading our country who's essentially working for or very much so compromised by other governments?
The administration unlocked $6 billion. Okay. And they're saying, well, it was for humanitarian purposes. Right. Except they admit that Iran has a record of funding terrorists and that they've always funded terrorists. I don't know why they thought this time would be different. John Kirby, the shadow press secretary of the White House, said this morning that they could lock those funds again. Why? What should we do to make sure that they do lock those funds up and don't allow Iran to access them?
I think it shouldn't even be a question. I think it should have happened the minute that Hamas really went into and invaded Israel and did some of the just egregious things that we're seeing now all over the internet. But ultimately, I think that that's going to be something that Congress has to discuss, the Senate, and ultimately the White House. And as you're seeing right now, I'm sure you're going to be asking me about this next, but we have a speaker's race this Wednesday. And so that will be very telling in how we proceed forward.
So before I get to the speaker's race, I want to touch on something you brought up. You're on the House Oversight Committee. Tell us, where is the impeachment inquiry right now? What do you know, and what are you hoping to find out?
Well, I know that Chairman Comer has subpoenaed bank records tied to Hunter Biden, as well as some of his associates. I've been a firm and I think active believer in that we need to bring this vote to the floor and ultimately start impeachment, because what we're finding right now is organizations like the FBI, even the IRS have been stonewalling us. And then also to these organizations, third party, are now going after Chairman Comer for conducting these investigations. And I would even argue that that's, contempt of Congress, what they're doing. And yet, because we don't have some of these positions, as you know, Sean, that these are top-down appointed positions from the administration, they're running cover for this administration. So really, in my opinion, the only way to really get that information truly out to the American people is to conduct impeachment. Now, do we think that Joe Biden will be impeached? No, not likely, because we don't have control of the Senate. But the fact is that these facts have to get out there and the press needs to do their job and cover it. And so as of right now, again, everything's most certainly at a standstill until we can elect a new speaker. But moving forward, I do believe, especially if Jim Jordan is elected, which it's sounding like it might be, that we are going to have an aggressive approach and really be, I think, bringing that vote to the floor.